Hey everyone, welcome back. This week we're going to take a deep dive into the latest Nutstuff research note. And wow, they have some pretty bold predictions about big market shifts. Shifts that could have really big implications for investors, like you guys.
What I find really interesting about Nutstuff is that they're so good at connecting global events with market trends. They go beyond the headlines. They really analyze how stuff in the news, how it can actually affect
Yeah,
investors.
absolutely. And their first big point this week is all about how global power is shifting.
Mm.
They're saying that the war in Russia and Ukraine, it's actually making Europe less powerful economically, which is
Hmm.
something investors, definitely can't ignore.
And that really stood out to me because, well, it's kind of like what we've seen throughout history, right? Wars, they have a way of changing the world. Think about World War One. What happened to the British Empire? The strain on their economy, all the new players on the global stage really weakened them.
And Nutstuff actually puts it pretty bluntly. They say the psychology in Europe is the same as that before World War One: emotional, uninformed, jingoistic, and without realism. It's like they're saying this conflict could have consequences that go way beyond just, the immediate crisis, the humanitarian stuff.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful statement. It really makes you think that investors need to reevaluate, what they think about Europe's role in the global economy. I mean, if this analysis is right, it could mean that, well, money will flow out of Europe and go toward places that are going to benefit from this power shift.
So, what does that mean for investors? Should they just completely pull out of European markets?
Not necessarily. It's more about understanding all the little details and adjusting, your strategy. Maybe it means putting your money in different places with better growth, or maybe focusing on certain parts of Europe that aren't as affected by all the political stuff.
Gotcha. So moving on, Nutstuff's second big prediction is about, well, a possible sea change in UK energy policy, specifically in the North Sea. They say the current policy is basically economic suicide.
Yeah.
They're really pushing the idea that cheap energy is what makes an economy strong.
Yeah, and they're not just making, provocative statements. They actually reference research from this group, Thunder said, that's predicting a big shift in North Sea oil and gas policy. They're suggesting that, both Europe and the UK might have to kind of walk back some of their goals for renewable energy, because of energy security worries and the fact that it's really expensive to transition too quickly.
And here's where it gets interesting. Nutstuff thinks that the UK's incentive gas price could be cut in half, going from $13.50 per MCF to $7. And on top of that, there's a possible 60 to 65% tax rate and a 12% weighted average cost of capital. It really changes the whole picture for energy investment in the UK.
Yeah, it does. And this raises some big questions for investors. Does this make renewable energy investments in the UK look more appealing? Or maybe it means there's an opportunity for those who, are okay with more risk, maybe investing in traditional energy, hoping for a comeback for North Sea oil and gas. It's a tricky situation with potentially huge consequences.
It's not all bad news, though. Nutstuff actually suggests a UK energy basket of companies, Diversified Energy, AJ Lucas, Pantheon, Harbor, Rebold, Tillo, Serica, and Keystos. They call it a hodgepodge of extreme risk and lower risk exposures. Which, sounds pretty accurate, right? Given how uncertain everything is with UK energy policy.
Yeah, it really does. It just shows how important diversification is, especially in areas like this that are facing such, huge changes. It seems like Nutstuff is saying that the smartest move, in this environment at least, is to play it safe. Have a
Right.
mix of companies that are involved in both traditional energy and renewables.
Right, so switching gears a little bit. Nutstuff dives into big tech. It's been a major market driver for quite a while now. And they get that, they acknowledge that, but they also see some things that make them think maybe big tech's going to get re-rated, not valued as highly. And what I thought was really interesting were these two things they pointed out. One, growing competition from China, and two, the fact that these big tech companies, they need more and more money, more capital to just keep going.
Yeah, those are some pretty big things to worry about. I mean, on the China front, you see them making huge progress in AI, artificial intelligence, and semiconductors. For example, Joe Tsai from Alibaba, he recently said that he thinks AI could maybe even replace research analysts. That's a pretty crazy thought, right? And
Hmm.
it has huge implications for companies like Google, Microsoft, all those companies whose business is really built on analyzing data and using AI.
And the Nutstuff actually links to that CNBC article about Joe Tsai's prediction, which I thought was pretty cool. They also talked about Tesla working with Baidu, to use their mapping technology for Tesla's self-driving system. It's fascinating to see how all this is playing out. These collaborations, these rivalries, all on a global scale.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about, who gets the most customers. It's really about like who's going to control the technology of the future, which I mean that has huge implications for national security, for economic power, investors they've really got to be paying attention to this stuff because it
Yeah.
could totally change the whole tech landscape.
And then, you've got the whole issue of capital intensity, like I was saying. Nutstuff is basically saying that as these tech companies, as they keep investing in things like data centers and research for AI, new hardware, all that stuff, it could actually lead to lower profit margins. And that could definitely impact, how investors value these companies.
Right.
It's not just about growing as fast as you can anymore, right?
Yeah.
Investors, they want to see, sustainable profits.
Exactly. And that's creating a whole new set of challenges for big tech. It's like they got to find this balance between spending money to grow for the future and also making sure their shareholders are happy, getting those returns. It's a tough spot to be in. I'm curious to see how they handle it all.
Okay, so the last big market shift Nutstuff talks about this week is, well, digital assets. You remember all the hype around crypto a few years ago.
Mhm.
Well, they're saying that, all that craziness, it's kind of died down. But the technology behind it all, blockchain, that still has a ton of value.
You know what I love? It's how Nutstuff explains this. They use this analogy. They compare blockchain to like railroads. It's a network for moving stuff, real world stuff. It just cuts through all the noise and gets to like the core of why blockchain could be so revolutionary.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. It's not just about, people buying and selling to make a quick buck anymore. It's about building this whole new infrastructure for moving like value and information in a way that's more secure, more transparent, more efficient. But what kind of like real world stuff are we actually talking about here? What could be transported on this blockchain railway in the future?
Well, that's a million-dollar question, right? And it's something that investors really need to think about if they want to, take advantage of this technology's potential. We're already seeing blockchain being used for things like supply chain management, verifying people's identities online, and even like owning parts of real estate, fractional ownership. But honestly, I think we're just getting started.
Yeah, Nutstuff seems to think so too. They talk about this guy, George Olver, at Sycamore Gap. It's a digital asset investment firm. Apparently, they've been quietly making some pretty impressive returns. And they point out that Olver, he's not focused on all the more shall we say unsavory parts of the crypto world. It's a more mature, a more strategic approach to this whole new asset class.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, the digital asset world has had its share of scams and just, craziness, but there are some serious people out there who are actually building something real, They're
Yeah.
exploring the long-term potential of this technology.
And Nutstuff brings back the railroad analogy to really drive this point home. They say, think railroads. That's what blockchain web 3.0 is, a faster, much more efficient railway network with 900 million to 1 billion stations, wallets. What they're saying is that, like, we don't need new railroads. The tracks are there. What we need are the right yards to build the new carriages, right? And those carriages, they need to be carrying stuff that people actually need and want. Real world stuff.
I love that image. It's so clear. It's like the infrastructure is there, right? The challenge now is to build the apps, the services that will make this technology truly like change the world. And that's where the real opportunity is for investors, finding the companies that are building those yards and those carriages of the blockchain future.
Speaking of opportunities, Nutstuff also brings up something they mentioned earlier in the week about Bitcoin ETFs. They're saying that even though Bitcoin's price dropped like 25% recently, money's still flowing into those Bitcoin ETFs pretty much at the same rate. Which to me, that says that people who are in it for the long haul, they still believe in Bitcoin, even when the market's, going up and down like crazy.
That's really interesting. It makes me think that maybe maybe the whole digital asset investor base is like growing up a little bit.
Yeah.
We're moving past that phase where it was all just speculation. You're seeing more institutional money, long-term money coming in. It's a sign that maybe digital assets are becoming more mainstream.
Which, if that happens, that could really affect their price stability, their long-term growth.
So it sounds like Nutstuff is saying that now's the time to be looking for those companies that are, actually building stuff with blockchain, the ones that are solving real problems, creating real value, not just, hype. Yeah, exactly. It's about, seeing past all the hype and figuring out what the real potential is. And that takes a deep understanding of the technology, of the market, the actual problems that blockchain can solve.
And that stuff, they throw in a little bit of wisdom for investors, for dealing with this crazy volatile market. They remind us that fear is temporary and greed is permanent. And they say investors should, be patient, focus on the best, they say the best rolling stock carrying the best loads, which I guess means like the companies that are really solid, strong fundamentals, and they're working on real world applications, the stuff that's actually going to matter.
It's a good reminder that when you invest in these new technologies, you gotta think long term. There are going to be ups and downs, but the people who can ride it out, who can focus on the real value, they're the ones who are gonna come out ahead in the end.
All right, so before we wrap up, Nutstuff throws in a couple of interesting things that, well, they're not really about the main investment themes, but they're kind of fun. Give you a little insight into how they think. They talk about Bernard Arnault, the CEO of that big luxury goods company, LVMH, and how, maybe he's not too happy about Trump's trade policies, and how, maybe Americans will just have to, drink their own domestic wines instead of that fancy stuff like Whispering Angel Rosé.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, but it also makes you think about like the unintended consequences of trade wars,
Yeah.
and how they can affect even the really expensive stuff, the luxury goods. It just shows that what happens in the world, it can have these ripple effects, across all sorts of industries and markets, even ones that you wouldn't think are connected.
And then last but not least, they mentioned this video, a town called Bruce. It's about Aberdeen in Scotland. And they really seem to think this video is like super powerful. They want everyone to watch it. And they connect it back to Serica Energy, that company that's involved in oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. Maybe they see Aberdeen as like a symbol of the UK energy sector coming back to life, like we were talking about earlier.
It's another example of how Nutstuff just like connects all these different things, all these pieces of information into this bigger story.
Yeah.
They really want us to think critically, to look for those connections that are driving, what's happening in the markets in the world.
So as always, Nutstuff gives us, a lot to think about. They've given us this different perspective, this contrarian view on some of the biggest changes happening in the markets right now. They're challenging the conventional wisdom, making us think about new possibilities. And remember, like this deep dive, their research is a really valuable way to understand all the complexities of the financial world.
And before we go, it's important to remember that Nutstuff is an appointed representative of Messels Ltd, and they're authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
Right, exactly. It's always important to do your own research, to really think about where your information is coming from before you make any investment decisions. But I think Nutstuff gives us a great starting point. They've highlighted some key trends, they've connected the dots, and they've encouraged us to really think critically about what's driving the markets.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really curious what stuck out to you, given all the changes, the geopolitical stuff, the economic stuff we've talked about. What industries, what sectors are you most interested in exploring further?
Yeah, what new questions has this deep dive, sparked for you? The world's always changing, and staying informed, that's the key to being successful. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep questioning the conventional wisdom. Until next time.
Disclaimer. North Breach Limited, Nutstuff trading name, is an appointed representative of Messels Limited, which is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Nutstuff has made every reasonable effort to ensure the information provided in this communication is correct, but Nutstuff makes no representation nor any warranty as to whether the information is accurate, complete, or up to date. To the extent permitted by law, Nutstuff accepts no responsibility for any errors or misstatements, negligent or otherwise. Nutstuff, its associates, officers, or employees may also have interests in the financial instruments referred to in this information by acting in various roles. The information in this media is confidential. If you are not the intended recipient, you are not authorized to use the information in this media in any way. Nutstuff does not guarantee the integrity of any media or attached files. The view or opinions expressed are the author's own and may not reflect the view or opinions of Nutstuff. Electronic communications carried within the Nutstuff system may be monitored.